Good to go.
Are there any, is there anyone from the public or?
No.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, I don't think we're gonna hit for it today, so we might as well start. Okay, so good evening, everyone. This is the State Licenses and Permits Committee of Community Board 5. I'm Janice Young, your committee chair, and we'll go around the room to introduce ourselves. So where do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Samir Lavingia, on the community board.
Catherine Ellington.
Hi, I'm Milan Mijatovic, community board member.
David Shapiro.
Libby Hatton.
Tom Ricardo.
Great.
Is there anyone here virtually? No.
That's very, very strange. I don't know what's here.
Just leave that for now.
But it's okay. You can join us later. So we have 2 items on the agenda tonight. Public comment to guidelines on cannabis licensing, and then the discussion to revise the guidelines on cannabis licensing. Is there anyone attending that has any other business for the committee other than the items on the agenda? If so, please raise your hand in person or virtually. Okay. Seeing none, new business is closed. We'll now move on to our first agenda item, which is a public hearing, but seeing that we have no public attendees,
That's her virtual.
What's the public hearing on?
cannabis.
Oh,
Nothing to
So, yeah, hey Todd.
Hi, everybody.
Well, we
Oh,
cannot hear him.
not able to hear you.
Can you hear me now? No?
Okay,
Hello?
well, you figure that out. Since no one is here from the public, I'll move on to our next agenda item, which is the presentation. There will be a Q&A following the presentation, so if anyone does have public comment, they can jump in then. So. Let me share screen. All right, so for this presentation, start off with an intro as to what we're doing today and why we're doing it. Then going into basically the areas where we as a community board can comment in regard to cannabis. So that is time, place, and manner. Under that, we have all the types of facilities that count as place, and then under time and manner, that's really referring to hours of operation, method of operation, and then just the application review and community engagement processes. After that, I will summarize the points that are really on the table for us to discuss, and then we'll jump into our committee discussion. Okay, so the marijuana the Marijuana Regulation Taxation Act basically empowers us to pass local laws and regulations governing time, place, and manner. And I should say us as in the municipality or the city, not us as a community board, but we are here to inform that information. And that is provided that such law or regulation is not going to be unreasonably impractical as determined by the Cannabis Control Board. So again, the regulations really have us commenting on time, place, and manner. Time specifically refers to hours of operation for which there are sort of standards that we need to work with provided by the state. In regard to place, that refers to the distance requirements between the cannabis licensee and a public youth facility, which I will get into the definition of later. And then in regard to manner, that's really in reference to the method of operation for the licensee. So noise, odor, traffic control, those sorts of things. So that's really what we as a community board are empowered to comment on. Everything else is out of scope, but that doesn't necessarily mean that, it's not a concern to our community and, should still be part of the discussion that we have here. We'll get that. Yeah, let me. I lost the window. Oh, there it is. Okay. Okay, there we go. Okay. So, our role in this is to balance the interests of our community. And that means that we want to welcome good operators while ensuring our current community members are addressed. The applicant, they're coming in, they want to obtain a license in our district. They have ideas as to how they want to run their business. And then we have our current residents, businesses who are coming in with their concerns and, ultimately just want to make sure that they're going to be able to live their lives, run their businesses, not have that disrupted. And so we, as a community board, are there to help these two parties find common ground and really embody that in the method of operation that is going to exist for the applicant. So with that said, the guidelines must be revised to enable legal cannabis businesses to open while protecting our community interests. To get into details as to why we're talking about this, the issues are that we as a community board have been reluctantly denying applications based solely on the distance requirements that are listed in the cannabis guidelines. And that is, opposed to getting into the method of operation or the merits of the applicant, which is, what we traditionally look at when dealing with other licenses. And another issue is that the guidelines were based on now outdated legislation. And as a result of that, the Office of Cannabis Management is just not respecting our recommendations. So, in order for us to be effective mediators in the community, we launched a research effort to understand what current community sentiment is regarding legal cannabis businesses and how our current guidelines were affecting our review. And then also we, in entering this discussion, want to understand what the current legislation is, how that plays out in regard to the potential number of cannabis businesses possible in our district, and then also look at what other community boards are doing to review applications. And the ultimate end goal of this is that, we must align these guidelines with current law, and then advocate for those other changes that don't fall under the law, but, are still important to our community. So in order to get that community sentiment, we did launch a survey, which was an effort led by Milan, and he's going to talk about exactly what went down.
All right, yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone, Milan here again. All right, I'll walk through the methodology, what we did, and then we have some initial insights that we can touch on as well. So we use Google Forms. I know this has been a standard tool within CV5 and others. We deployed this survey targeting folks who live, work, or go to school within the boundaries of Community Board 5. And our focus also included business owners of legal cannabis dispensaries. So we did also make attempts to reach out to those, and we do have some input from them as well in our survey data. We distributed via the CV5 email newsletter. Some of you probably got that. We also compiled a list of different neighborhood mailing distributions and other like local organizations, and so distributed via those channels as well. And last but not least, we also leveraged the Link NYC kiosks. So you could actually scan a QR code. Yeah, it was pretty cool. So those are popping up around Midtown Manhattan. And I actually did get a chance to see it in person, which was really cool. We were able to collect about 50 completed responses. So I was hoping that we could hit around 30 to 50. So we hit the upper boundary of that, which is not bad. We fielded for about a month. So 30 days from late February to just a few days ago. From a survey questionnaire design, it was a mix of closed and we did a little bit of logic and branching for cannabis businesses. So for example, if you identified yourself as a cannabis business owner or worker, we had some special questions that would be just shown to you. And then like Janice touched on, all of this kind of is intended to roll up to the time, place, and manner aspect in this regulatory framework. So we wanted this survey to kind of roll up to the broader goals of this effort. And moving along, we've got a couple of slides that touch on broad results. This isn't intended to be like a research readout, so we do have more in-depth slides, but just to give you a sense of some of the high-level things. So the way I've structured this summary of results is we have general takeaways, just broad themes across whatever your position is on cannabis within Community Board 5. And then we segmented out feedback from those who indicated that they are very supportive of the legal cannabis industry in Manhattan Community Board 5, and those who are against. Really with the purpose of just trying to tease out the differences of opinion there. So I'll read them out. So there were a range of opinions across residents, workers, and business owners. One of the things was this desire for consistency, clarity, and stronger enforcement of cannabis laws. Regardless of your position, this idea of legal status was frequently referred, regardless again of support or opposition. And the community wants dispensaries to be well-managed, discreet, and ultimately safe for the community. So that's irrespective of whatever your position was. Within the camp that was more supportive of the legal cannabis dispensary industry, that their argument, their rationale is that it is legal, it should be treated similarly to alcohol, so we should give it equal treatment. Legal dispensaries are seen as safer, cleaner, and better regulated. And then support for access, personal choice, and small business growth were among some of the other reasons around supporting the cannabis industry in CD5. Those who were more concerned and expressed some opposition, over concentration of dispensaries in sensitive areas. So think like within respect to CB5 guidelines, like playgrounds or parks, or state guidelines talking about schools and houses of worship, concerns around having a presence of those in those kinds of areas. Hours being viewed as disruptive, like loitering, noise, safety concerns. And then finally, visibility to kids, and not always being able to demonstrate consistent enforcement around kids' access to marijuana is something else that popped up. Moving along, we also extracted some quotes. So these are actually things that respondents have said. So for example, here's some emblematic quotes that I think captured a lot of the general sentiment from the community. So I'll read it here. So the state has legalized cannabis, and there needs to be a rigorous and standardized process to allow for legal stores. The city similarly needs to have rigorous recourse for when stores illegally operate rather than going through the permitting process. So that was a quote from a resident. Another emblematic quote around the support for cannabis in CB5. There are 2 legal dispensaries in my immediate neighborhood. Both appear to be clean and well-managed stores providing services to the public wants. I would rather have more dispensaries and fewer liquor stores and bars. And I think this respondent, if I recall, might have only moderately supported cannabis and CB5. So they weren't even necessarily a strong advocate. Moving along, we also have some quotes on the other side of the fence. So those who were more in opposition. And again, these are just meant to give you a flavor of the diversity of thoughts around this. Too many stores and smell permeates everywhere was one that frequently came up as a general theme. Dispensaries are near schools. They use colorful advertising that attract the attention of children. Their advertising practices are banned by alcohol and tobacco, but somehow okay for marijuana. And then finally, I'm often walking alone and there are very unpleasant people standing on the sidewalks around the cannabis lounge. They attempt to get people hooked on drugs. And I think moving along, we do also have some thoughts from actual cannabis business owners, which was really nice. So I'll just read those. I believe marijuana has had a bad reputation to begin with, and if people actually were educated on all the health benefits of marijuana, we as retailers would be welcomed more and fully supported by all community boards. We are required to educate all consumers on all products on our shelves in the most professional way possible. So that was a direct quote from one cannabis business owner. Next, I'm concerned with the illegal smoke shops and how it affects my legal business. I'm also concerned with public convenience, as the 1,000 square foot rule does make sense in some areas, but like CB5 have a greater need. There are multiple pharmacies, food eateries, coffee shops, etc. So the same rules should apply to legal cannabis. It should be focused on number of potential customers and not the distance from another licensed dispensary. And again, that is another direct quote from a cannabis business owner.
Great, thank you, Juan. So jumping off with that, you know, if we look at who the stakeholders are, you know, we have the applicant, we have the community, and then we have ourselves. And when we think about how to go about revising these guidelines, I think it's good for us to keep in mind like where we want to end up. And so let's ask ourselves, like, what do successful guideline revisions enable? You know, I mean, feel free to correct me if you think differently, but you know, I think successful guidelines will enable an applicant to run operations responsibly and cooperate with the community to proactively address concerns. I feel that the community will feel operations are well run and not detracting from their quality of life. And I think if we do this right, we ourselves will be able to provide informed recommendations based on the applicant's method of operation and likelihood of being a positive community member, as opposed to, you know, just kind of not going through that process or rejecting them based on kind of, you know, like hard line deadlines or restrictions. So also, I think it's important to keep in mind that all of us are aligned on wanting to push out the illegal and badly operated cannabis stores. And a way to do that is, or a way that we hope will happen, is that these, by enabling these well-run legal establishments, it will lead to that result. So I do think that is something that we can all rally around, and I think it's something to keep in mind that, you know, we do have that common goal as we go through this. Okay, so we'll start off with in time, place, and manner with place, since that's sort of the most complicated area, I would say.
Jen, can
Yeah.
I just make a comment?
Yeah.
Or we just,
Is it the first one?
yeah, quick,
Okay.
really quick. I appreciate everything that's been done here so far. I just want to, if there's anything to add to what you were saying about the success of the guidelines, is that they should be futuristic and holding the future, and that they are the best possible, that we would be offering the best possible outcome given often competing and not always agreeable communities, residents, businesses, and applicants. So it's helpful to add that it's a process.
Great, yeah, that's definitely correct. Yeah, not as straightforward as you would like, unfortunately,
There's
but
no,
we
there's no
do our
straight
best.
line here, it's a trajectory, and it's a little, you know. And we wanna, it's hard work, and so we don't wanna, it's wonderfully presented. I think it's clear and concise what you said so far, so I don't wanna interrupt anything.
Excellent, great. No, I mean, for those watching this now or into the future, Catherine is our chair of our cannabis task force and did a lot of the hard work.
Early
putting in
work,
Early
right.
hard work and making sense of all this.
And I
so.
appreciate what's coming forward. And that the one thing, if I could just say one other thing, the one thing we want to keep in mind is that we do get to be futuristic. What that means is in SLAC, we are responding to a landscape that was created without much regulation over 100 years. And what we are trying to create is a landscape that has regulations that is a few years old, and most businesses are in year 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that we want to we get to create what this looks like in time. As opposed to, we get to be responsive as opposed to reacting to what already is.
Exactly. Great. Okay, so jumping into place. So the way that our committee has interpreted place in the past was really to think about an applicant's proximity to other cannabis locations as well as community facilities and other areas that might be somewhat sensitive. So that included places that were listed in the New York State regulations. So that included, again, other cannabis locations, places of worship, school grounds. They also include public youth facilities, which was re-termed and redefined from community facilities to be more specific, and we'll get into exactly what that definition is. But essentially, these are the locations that New York State has identified, and the way the distance is measured is that the licensee and the facility need to be on the same road, and a measurement, it's a straight line measurement between the two. So for example, if a school was around the corner, that wouldn't count. Meanwhile, our guidelines took those facilities into consideration as well as additional facilities. So we also included parks and public spaces, which was derived from community facilities, same with playgrounds. And then in addition to those, we also had considerations for harm reduction facilities and for residences. And we as a community board felt that especially given how dense our district is, the straight line measurement, again, didn't really make sense, and something could be around the corner. And so we were always measuring using walking distance. So these are sort of the places that, again, are on the table right now for discussion, since they are part of our current guidelines. But I do think it's important to really start to identify which locations are part of the state regulations and which are not. So diving into probably the most complicated location is this idea of the public convenience and advantage waivers that are being granted in regard to that 1,000-foot proximity protection rule. So in cities above a certain population, there's this rule saying that cannabis locations can't be located within 1,000 feet radius of one another. But the Cannabis Control Board has actually recently proposed changes to these distances and have created this idea of a PCA waiver in order for a cannabis location to be located within 1,000 feet of another. So the exact wording is here. So essentially the hard line now becomes 500 feet. And essentially, if you are between 500 to 1,000 feet, you as an applicant can apply for this waiver, and the Cannabis Control Board will decide, if you need that public convenience and advantage in order to be located within 1,000 feet. In addition, there's also this regulation saying that no on-site consumption license shall be granted within 500 feet of 3 or more existing on-site consumption premises. Again, unless the board determines that it would promote public convenience and advantage. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's based off of the 500-foot rule for liquor. But again, if you are familiar with how that works, the state basically decides that kind of everything is fits within these boundaries. So this is just something to be aware of. It's very fresh. I'm not even sure if they've posted this on the website yet, but it is coming. And I believe that it will be open for public comment. Yeah.
It hit the register today,
Oh, okay, perfect. Okay, great. So, yeah,
so it's here,
so it's here and we can comment on it.
and the deadline is May 19th.
Okay. Okay, great. Yeah, so that's something we can comment on as a board as well. But going off that thought. So by decreasing that radius requirement from 1,000 feet, which is about 4 blocks, to 500 feet, which is about 2 blocks, essentially quadruples the number of possible locations in our district. So these maps kind of give you an idea of where current license cannabis locations are within our district. So the yellow represents locations that are licensed, the orange is under review, and then the blue are locations that are just outside our district. But of course, it would still be subject to this law. It's a little bit deceptive because you can't see the midpoints of the circles, but because what you're seeing is the 500-foot radius. Essentially, if you're looking at, yes, my cursor. If you're looking at these 2 circles up here, another cannabis location could be located at this midpoint because that midpoint is also 500 feet from the other 2 midpoints. So this map is a little confusing because it's not about how much, blank space is left. But in order to give you a better sense of just the maximum number of cannabis locations we could have in our district, if you do the math and kind of think, if someone were to methodically plot a cannabis location every 1,000 feet within our district, you would end up with 53 locations in our district. And if you were to then take that same exercise and then apply the 500-foot radius to it, you would end up with 192 locations. So again, that's really the extreme, that's the max. And, one might argue that the 500, this PCA waiver isn't intended to like reduce the distance to 500 feet so that it could totally max out the number of locations, but essentially, when we think about like what is the potential of this is what we get. And also to help us think about this further.
For the last slide, you said like someone would have to methodically plot it out, so to get to that 192, we have to get rid of all the ones we just already have.
Yeah. Yeah, so it doesn't take into account what exists. It's just if you were to like start from one corner of
Got
the district and like plot every 1,000 feet. that's what you
Theoretical.
would end up.
maximum,
Yeah.
basically.
Is that, I just had a question about the color, sorry if I
Yeah.
missed this, did you start with like the boundaries or the blue ones and then you went in from there to add more, or?
Oh, so this is actually representative of what exists.
Okay,
Yeah, sorry, that's not clear.
okay, so which ones,
Yeah, so
what's the
actually,
color differential?
yeah, so it's basically, so this map that you see
Okay,
on this.
well
slide-
mapped.
Thanks.
I'm impressed.
It's a website that you can use. So the map on the left here is from the local website, so it lists out the actual licensed cannabis locations. So the ones in that like teal color are licensed, and then the ones in the orange are under review. So taking those locations and then plotting it onto this map to get the radius.
Do the yellow ones already exist too, or?
Yeah, the yellow ones exist, or at least they're licensed if they're not open yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
The teal ones are the ones that are licensed and open.
But the
Outside of our district is teal.
yes,
Oh,
sorry, the colors don't exactly match up. My
Okay.
bad. In this case, the ones that are blue, like that light
Got
blue, are just outside of the district.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay, I see now.
So, but there's still, like, it's not like, oh, you're in a different community board district now. You don't need to be 1,000 feet from one another.
Got it, okay,
So-
that makes sense.
So I thought it'd be worth seeing exactly what is also around us.
Actual,
Yeah.
real life rules, got it.
Yeah, but in regard to our district, the max number you could possibly have right now under the 1,000-foot rule is 53. And again, to kind of like give you a better sense of what that would look like. So with 15 licensed and 3 review, we're basically like at a third of that max number. And that max number is actually about the number of Starbucks that exists in our district. So I counted about 58, so you can kind of see, obviously this isn't like plotted 500 feet or 1,000 feet, from one another, but you can kind of get a sense of like the density. So you can imagine like where the Starbucks are as you're walking through our district. That's kind of like the max number of cannabis stores that could exist under that 1,000-foot rule.
Is the 18 Or is it the 53?
the 53.
Okay.
Yeah, so I think I counted like 58 in the district. Starbucks in the district. So it wouldn't exceed the number of Starbucks that exist in our district right now, unless they,
And
Start
that's the
granting the
realistic one
waivers.
where if you, with the current rules and everything else, you can just like squeeze them in around that 1,000 feet.
yeah, so that's like
But they
another
don't fall within
question.
the other constraints, like they're not next to a Pops, they're not near.
Yeah, exactly. That's not taking any constraints into account. That's literally like,
Just
If you
distance from
could-
each other.
yeah, like if you can methodically plot things and that real estate was available and you can make them exactly 1,000.
And it
feet
wasn't
apart.
near, and it wasn't near a Pops, and
Yeah.
it wasn't near everything else. Okay, okay,
Yeah.
so this is the, nothing
Yeah.
exists. Got it.
Yeah, this is like the absolute max.
Okay.
But that said, that's not reality. And that could be part of the reason why this waiver exists. So, we as a community board can choose to respond to a waiver request. We're given 45 days to do so once the applicant submits it to us. The Cannabis Control Board basically takes any factors into account. These are the ones that they outlined. So essentially, like, if there's demand for cannabis, then that would serve that purpose. But I guess they're also taking into account the general area, so the number of illicit cannabis dispensaries, in close proximity. But yeah, the last bullet is any other factors. So again, it's similar to liquor where the state can basically decide that it meets that public convenience and advantage and grant that license. That said, OCM wants us to use our, to essentially frame our recommendation along these points. And it would become one factor in their consideration of whether or not to grant the waiver. So for us, what that means is, we can choose to comment on the waiver, we can choose to not comment on the waiver. I suppose reasons for, if you think about what the waiver does, there could be situations, I don't know if people have read that, there's like I think it's like a Post article or something about like cannabis businesses kind of suing each other and other businesses because of this 1,000-foot rule. And there's sort of these situations where, one licensee is like 950 feet away from another one. And it's kind of like, maybe that's not a big deal, but obviously if something is going to be 500 feet from like just over 500 feet from the school, maybe that's a situation where, we wouldn't be so open to that. So those are just things to think about when we have a discussion after this as to, whether or not we should take the opportunity to comment on this waiver or just leave it to OCM to dole out. Okay, so moving on, I'll try to go quickly because these other locations were not really given power to redefine or kind of adjust the distance requirement for, but just so everyone's on the same page about what these are and what the law is. So for places of worship, the definition or the interpretation of it at least was revised to be more inclusive. And it is probably worthwhile to mention that the measurement of the straight line method is aligned with the alcoholic beverage law and the 200-foot rule in particular. So the regulations basically state that a place of worship is a whole building owned or leased by a religious corporation as described by New York State Religious Corporation Law. You can keep reading that, but essentially in the past, our community board has taken issue with the whole building definition because, we live in a district with a bunch of fixed use buildings. And so we were afraid that wouldn't apply, but it seems like, if you look at this local map, there's a lot more places of worship that are that count under this definition. So it seems like they are interpreting it more based on if that religious group is registered under New York State, which makes sense. And if you do look at the list of religious or places of worship that count, it does appear to be more inclusive than what would have counted before. So that said, also the community sentiment, no one really had much of an opinion in regard to how cannabis locations relate to churches. So I don't think we need to spend too much time on this one. That said, for school grounds, similarly, they revised the definition to rely on official filings. But of course, there's still a decent amount of concern around, exposure, to kids. And, again, similarly, if you look at the local map, it does appear to align with, the schools that are listed in the New York City facilities database, but it doesn't seem to count preschools, so that might be something that we need to look into to make sure those are covered, since they're covered according to the definition, so, or you would put there. And then for public use facilities, so as I was saying before, they did tighten the definition. They changed it from community facility and tightened the definition so that the Cannabis Control Board will not acknowledge something as a public use facility unless the city passed the local law defining something as a public use facility. And the guidelines for doing this that the state provides is that it needs to be a location or structure owned by the government, and that is accessible to the public, where the primary purpose is to provide recreational opportunities or services to children or adolescents. And that distance is set at 500 feet, which can't really be changed. Okay, so then going into the other locations that we've listed in our guidelines but are not covered by state law, with parks and public spaces and playgrounds, again, that's no longer included as a public use facility. But it is important to note, or people, I imagine, would like to know that cannabis use in public spaces is illegal. So, and the city can actually, they have the ability to impose a $50 fine if they wish to try to enforce that. And
That's right. It's illegal to smoke. I thought it was totally legal to smoke in the street.
I think
In the street, but
like
not
a-
a park.
yeah, like a gathering space.
Oh,
Yeah,
Mhm, yeah.
yeah. So, hopefully, what was that? No, I'm
And
kidding.
Also, street is like certain number of feet from a ingress. Like, or something.
Right, like you can't smoke in front of some buildings.
Yeah, like a residential building, it's not just like the residents are like,
What's that?
please leave, it's like, I think it's,
Or you
is
can't-
there,
You can't
is
smoke in
there?
front of near the door.
Yeah,
It's right near the door.
Yeah, so, cannabis is treated the same as tobacco and, yeah, so
And, like,
hopefully that,
Cigarettes, it's the same. thing.
yeah. So hopefully that addresses or helps address, again, the community sentiment around, worries around exposure to kids.
I would be very open to doing a resolution talking about banning consumption in public spaces or in the open,
You mean like on the street?
on the street. You can't drink a beer or have a cocktail on the street. I don't think you should have cannabis on the street.
Something to look
Open
into.
container laws are decriminalized, aren't they?
Okay.
No.
Decriminalize, once again.
Well, let's not.
They not write your
Okay.
tickets?
Let's talk about this later.
That was decriminalized.
No.
We'll talk about this
It's not a
later.
criminal offense, it's a civil.
Well,
Civil offense, but you still get $100 ticket.
You
Okay.
can get like a C summons or something. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, but that said, even though those parks and public spaces and playgrounds don't count as public use facilities, there might be some that the city could pass a local law to protect as such. So these are the types of facilities that we had mentioned and we had considered when we were reviewing applications in the past. So we have playgrounds, childcare facilities, libraries, parks, pedestrian plazas, and POPs. And you have we have one playground in our district, that's in Madison Square Park. And, based on the criteria that the state provides, that would probably count the fact that it's government owned and, serves children. Some other areas might be a little bit iffy because they're either not government owned or they serve more than children, even if they have a lot of, programming for children. So that's like, libraries or even other institutions like museums. So that might be something that could be argued, but maybe not sure where that would go. And then there are places that probably wouldn't really make the cut. So we have pedestrian plazas, we have 14 art districts. These are places like Times Square, Vanderbilt Plaza near Grand Central, Herald Square. And then, we have the POPs are privately owned public spaces, of which we have 106. Some of which are outdoors, some of which are indoors even. Yeah, scattered all over, used to various degrees, but yeah, probably wouldn't make the cut. But I think it's helpful to see just, you know, based again, what we considered in the past, just what could be something that's worth us advocating for. Next, we have harm reduction facilities, which the survey showed some concern, but OCM really has just rejected our comments regarding the effect of cannabis access on recovery efforts. And there are a lot of challenges here. So first of all, you know, harm reduction facilities are not granted any proximity protections for any substance, like including tobacco and alcohol. The Office of Cannabis Management has heard comments regarding harm reduction facilities, and you know, they've chosen not to revise the regulations after hearing those comments. For us, it's difficult to locate these facilities, and they are potentially transient. And then, of course, you know, even though cannabis certainly comes with its own health risks, there are people who would argue that, you know, there's research on both sides in regard to the effect on cannabis on addiction recovery efforts, whether it like weans people off or, you know, kind of stops them from really making progress. And you know, again, the community sentiment is that there were like a few people who mentioned concern around cannabis locations being near these facilities. And there was also a past claim that stated that the proliferation of illegal operations between 6th and 8th Avenues and Penn Station and Bryant Park is an issue because it attracts individuals who loiter outside, you know, trying to offer people more illicit substances. And you know, that's something that we definitely want to take seriously and have written, you know, public comment on before. But I think, you know, the fact that this is in reference to the illegal operations is just something to maybe keep in mind as a separate issue that we will address. Okay, and then lastly, with residences, our current guidelines restrict hours of operation for on-site consumption locations when they are within 500 feet of a residence. You know, any sort of further restrictions, again, would be difficult. Similarly, residences are not granted proximity protections for other substances. And OCM, you know, heard people's comments about residences and again, chose not to act on it. But the concern around loitering, garbage, and outdoor usage, you know, these are method of operation concerns. And so even if we can't impose any proximity protection regulations, method of operation issues are addressable. So we can focus our efforts there. Okay, and then lastly, just in regard to the measurement method, you know, we as a board have always questioned the straight line measurement given the city density, but it is consistent with the alcoholic beverage law. And, you know, I think, again, given the density, contact really is unavoidable. So if you look at these two examples here, the one on the left shows the distance between a high school and one of our cannabis locations. It's under 500 feet walking distance, but wouldn't count because it's not on the same road. And then the example on the right, the school and the dispensary are on the same road. But I mean, like, I think it's worth asking ourselves if that's, you know, the fact that it's just over 500 feet, is that far enough or is that still too close? And kind of like, what does 500 feet even mean when our district is this dense? Also, when we really focus on the issue that people and the concerns that people have around exposure to children, you know, maybe it's not so much about distance, but it's about the advertising and making sure that operators are complying with the regulations around, make sure that, you know, the product is not visible in the windows and they aren't putting out like 8 frames with like cannabis leaves on it, things like that. So. Okay. So next portion is time and manner. Try to be quick. our hours of operation for all cannabis establishments align with New York State law and are actually based off of our liquor license standards. So again, cannabis law states that a retail operation can't operate between 2 to 8 AM, and then on-site can't operate from 4 AM to 8 AM. For us, we as a community board for liquor don't comment on retail sales. Which I believe is why it's set at 2 AM. However, in the past, we have attempted to really align a cannabis business's hours with just the businesses that are in the
In the
neighborhood.
neighborhood.
Yeah. And then for onsite, which of course we have not seen yet, that is set, very much according to our liquor guidelines. With that addition for residences. And it is interesting to note that from the survey, 4 out of 5 respondents felt that these operating hours are too lenient, so. Again, this could be something that we look at.
Okay, sorry, quick question on that one. Okay, so there's, people think that 2 AM is too lenient for the retail.
I think we just asked hours of operation in general,
Got
Yeah,
or did we say retail?
we just said we just asked about the appropriateness of operating hours between 8 AM and 2.
got it. Right,
That is it.
thank you.
Okay, and then our method of operation requests, we in general try not to be prescriptive as to how they comply with the law, but we did try to like model the cannabis requests with what we would usually request with liquor. So we asked for noise mitigation plans, odor mitigation plans, crowd control and security plans. In our liquor license affidavits, we reference the laws, so that the applicants have a reference as to what they need to abide by. And that's something that we could be more specific about, but or we could just keep things the way they are. So getting into the process, the regulations require applicants to submit notice to the community boards. But then after that, it's really just us hoping that the applicant is going to be, a willing collaborator in this process, and that they're actually going to engage with the community, starting by filling out the questionnaire. So, again, this process involves the applicant, us, and the community. Those looking at this might think it looks familiar, and that's because it is. It's nearly the same as our liquor review process, except, the issue that we've had in the past is that the influx of applications that we received, like literally like 100 at a time, made this whole process impossible. So we didn't even get to really looking at the method of operation for these applicants and setting up the community meetings that we wanted to set up. And we ended up relying on the distance requirements, which again led to denial. So as a reminder as to why we need to change these guidelines. And then lastly, thought it'd be good to look at what the other community boards in Manhattan are doing. So the majority, if not all, require a questionnaire from the applicant and request that the applicant appears before the board. There's some other additional resources that community boards have provided, which could be useful for the applicant, where they create basically like a checklist or a list of procedures that the applicant has to follow. So that could involve requesting a notice, like a copy of the lease, a site plan, and then requesting that the applicant fills out or signs an affidavit. A couple community boards request a community impact statement or plan. CV7, based on their resolutions, does a somewhat structured review where they're basically it seems like they're methodically going through like, oh, do they have the proper permitting? Did they submit a site plan? So that's something that could be interesting for us to reference. But in terms of additional guidelines on top of the state guidelines, only 3 community boards seem to do this, including ourselves, and the other 2 are CB1 and CB9.
question. What does CB6 do, if anything? I don't see them.
Yeah, I couldn't find anything.
They don't have any weed, I guess.
Or
I mean, they
just
definitely
like-
hear applications at their meetings, but I don't know, I couldn't find like their questionnaire, so,
Good catch.
yeah. I think CB 10, I also couldn't find any information for.
Yep.
But yeah, if we were to dive into exactly what their guidelines are saying, so. It seems like we were sort of the first movers on this, and then maybe, we collaborated with the community boards to set up other restrictions, but, CB1 essentially listed out the same facility as us, but, for them, they actually consider distance as just one factor in the decision, and it's not like this, eliminating factor as it is with us. Meanwhile, CB9, elaborates on their facilities a little differently. And the other noteworthy thing is that they call for earlier retail, closure, so they call for 12 AM instead of, 2 AM. And then there's a bunch of other, areas that are covered in their guidelines, we have noise and odor mitigation, restriction like licensing areas, outdoor space. CB9 just has noise and outdoor mitigation, they request a community impact statement, and they don't require an affidavit as we do. Meanwhile, CB1 does ask for an affidavit, and they've also drawn attention to the measurement method and asking OCM to kind of respect these localized differences. So. Okay, so getting to what is on the table for our discussion then. So again, with the goal in mind of revising the guidelines to align with current law, and to enable legal businesses while making sure that we hear our community concerns and advocate for things that are going to benefit our community. The standards that we will be discussing tonight include hours of operation, method of operation, community engagement, what to do about the PCA waiver, what facilities are going to count as protected facilities, and then just a question of if, like, how RLAs should be considered, existing RLAs as well as any future RLAs you might want. Okay, so yeah. Any questions?
Great job putting that together. Thank you.
I know, I mean,
I'm impressed with the maps.
yes, maps are good,
Maps are great.
yeah, tells people.
yes, that is just a fantastic job, Janice.
um,
And make
Is there
sure that you
any,
distribute that to
um,
everybody. Do we have a hard copy of it available yet?
is there any thought to, do we always hear an applicant? Or is there a set of guidelines that make us want to especially hear from an applicant? For example, when the applicant is in a residential building, is that an automatic red flag because of its proximity to residents, people who live there? And how do we do that in our process?
Yeah, that could be
Going
definitely,
forward.
yeah, something that we consider tonight is,
Mhm.
if we want to set that expectation for applicants that, hey, if you're gonna like take that retail space in a residential building, you're definitely gonna have to come to the committee. Although I think right now we hear every applicant, right?
No, there's I lost count, but the early so
Okay, or more like, is the intent to not have to ask every applicant?
right, so right. Because so your map points to 53 locations. When we heard from the independent budget office on OCM's goals, they don't have a limit. They're trying to,
But there's a geographic limits, but
Well, let's
the,
not, let's let Catherine.
oh,
yeah, so they don't have a limit. We're trying to bring revenue into the city and district. And so that is a competing force against also what we're trying to create, right? So, yeah, so the question is. No, so will we hear every applicant? There are locations open now, we have not heard. We have not heard those applications, those applicants have not come to us,
Yeah.
and I don't
which is
understand
a-
how we.
Which is actually, against the regulations if they're not noticing us, but.
They should always.
Notice.
Yeah, they are
They're-
required. That is the one thing that,
Yeah.
so actually, I shouldn't have,
Not
specified the
exactly.
last couple of- Right, so, let me put this back up. Yeah, so in regards to community engagement, the applicant is required to notify the municipality, in our case, which is the community board for New York City. And they have to hit key points that are listed, in the regulations. But beyond that, like, they're not really required to come before us or.
That part is fine,
Yeah.
but are we hearing from, I don't think I think that's the change that we're looking for. Uh-huh.
I wanna just explain the 119.3, cause it's a little, there, Janice, can I explain?
Quickly.
Okay, so there's two states of having a license. There's like a temporary, like, so you have, it's not like a liquor license where before you open the bar, you can get the permanent liquor license, right? So what you have to do is you have to operate, you get a temporary license for 270 days that you have to show that you can operate as, you have to show that you're operating within the guidelines. So you get this temporary license, you open your business, because there were concerns about banking and some of this has been shifted a bit, but so in those 270 days, if you want to get a permanent license where you're not in this 270-day temporary license thing, you have to come to the community board and you have to do it 30 days before your license runs out. So 7 months in, if you're gonna ask for a permanent and not be in these 270-day kind of license loops, then they have to go to you can't get a permanent license without going to the community board.
Yeah, which is
But
what we're dealing with, right? Like, we're talking about, I don't know why someone would just operate temporarily, right? Like, I think everyone wants the end goal is to get.
but like you also have the right, like if you're 240 days in and you don't think you're gonna get the community board or something like that, you can ask for a new temporary license. You can constantly punt it.
Okay, so that might actually be like another, I mean, that might be a separate thing that we want to be aware of if people are doing that,
Yes.
sounds like.
I think there was supposed to be a change to that,
Mhm.
because that's what's happened is there's openings and there's no notification. I think also what we haven't talked about, I don't know how, is the map that now exists of active, applications, which we didn't have a year ago. Right, so that's brand new
Yeah,
as a tool to at least be able to see
yeah,
and
for sure.
anticipate.
Yeah, that is the local tool, which,
So there was a punt on that, and the reason is they found that some of the banking that was set up by the state was found illegal. So
Like federally or something.
no, it was the state made a bet, like, and so instead of using, so some of them were using the state itself as banking, because you can't use an interstate bank. You have to use an intrastate bank, right? So there's a limitations, like some of the banks are intrastate that might have more than one state. So like Apple Bank has a setup in New York, and there's Apple Bank of New York, and Apple Bank of New Jersey, so that they don't have to go under federal order. So you have to find a bank that does that. So what happened is the state said, well, we're gonna create a minority fund. Because the banks might not want to bank with these people, and there might be, because of the audience they're doing. But then that bank was charging ridiculous rates, and they said, like, look, this isn't, so now that's back in front of legislation, and that's one of the things that's opened up legislation is they found like there was all sorts of corruption in the state-run bank. And it just, so the problem is the people
yeah,
that were
so that was
using
the,
it,
okay, so I don't want to get sidetracked because it's
Yeah.
not relevant to the guidelines. But I appreciate your knowledge and enthusiasm for this.
Well, yeah, and to get back to what we're doing, there's going to be a lot of temporary licenses, no, not so much in our district, but there will be. Because the state really screwed a lot of this up. That's why a lot of it's coming back, and that's why the registration, even though it's 2 years old. They're trying to copy a lot of stuff that California did. There were a lot of problems with the rollout, and there was a lot of corruption, right? And they came back. So that said, there's gonna be a lot of people that are in that perpetual and are totally getting approved in that perpetual provisional license state. So yeah, but that said, when things settle with the next round, hopefully with the next round of legislation, then they might be told, no, there's no more renewals. You've been renewing for 2 years. You need to get this done.
Okay, so something to keep in mind, a different time. Back to the, yeah, the local map that Catherine was mentioning. Yeah, so you can see here the dispensaries that, you know, are active, as well as those that are,
Are those hands like, what are the hands?
those are the places of worship.
Places of
Yeah.
worship, that's what, okay.
And then there are the schools here as well. So this is helpful for our applicants who are looking to see maybe where they can set up shop, and it's helpful for us to understand their compliance as well. But okay, so back to this tab. Okay, so I think moving forward, I would love it if it's totally fine to have questions on any part of the presentation, but moving forward, I would love for us to focus our comments on these points, because essentially, if we're making changes to our guidelines, you know, these are the things that we're gonna have to touch upon. For those who have not seen the guidelines in a while, essentially, this is what they look like now. So we have a section on distance with the facilities and the distance requirements. And right now it states that CB5 may only approve the license provided that an applicant meets all these distance requirements. There's a section on noise and odor mitigation, a section on hours of operation, the restricted licensing areas, outdoor space, and then the community engagement and process. And then we have a matrix as to how to consider applicants. And all of this, I've tried to summarize on these slides, but
Can I ask you a question?
yeah.
I totally did not realize, and tell me if I'm misinterpreting this, but you make reference to like, on-site consumption. I thought we did not allow that, but,
So it hasn't been authorized by the state yet. So there haven't been any on-site applicants that have come to us.
okay,
Yeah.
okay.
But we do ask if they anticipate they can tell, you know, they can talk about it. And this is the part where it's futuristic, because you
Yeah.
can see by the scale of some of the locations that there is the idea that eventually.
They want
it
to, they're
may
setting
or
up
may-
for the future to
Which
be
is
able
a
to do
different
that.
kind of business, but, right.
Sure.
I'm sorry, Janice, go ahead.
No. I want to make this bigger, but I don't know if I can see people online if I do.
You can like, zoom, you know. Shift.
If you press the arrow on the slideshow button,
Where is it?
it's actually hiding under the people.
Oh,
Just move the people and then the arrow, and then do presenter view. So then at least.
oh,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
And then I guess if you wanna see the
That's
people
fine.
again, you can open. it
Oh,
up.
excellent, thank you. Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure there's no, oh, let's see if I can promote. Jay,
So I would like to comment on the hours of operation.
yeah, let's start there.
Historically, what we've seen is that most applicants do not have any issue with no later than 2 AM. And so I think it stands with what's written in the current guidelines. Most, so for instance, when we heard from the avalanche of applicants, 99, whatever they were, and we asked that question, there was, if any, there were no objections to those hours of operation. And I think that that's a a great way to, test out, and keep that part of the hours of operation. There have been applicants where, again, when they're in residential buildings, the residents are asking, so for example, in Nomad, a lot of the businesses are closed by midnight. And so the residents were asking if they could close or change business hours, but I think that the guidelines help and everyone agreed, so there's some consensus there among cannabis potential applicants.
I was just looking at some of the feedback from our survey on the hours. And one of the big issues was around loitering, noise, safety. I don't know if there is if that's just a perception or if that's a reality that, you know, kind of dispensaries open till whatever
Yeah.
time are actually creating problems for the neighborhood. Because I feel like if there's not evidence to support that, then I think we're probably okay.
May I comment?
Yeah.
So my comment to that is a lot of it is perception, I think, because of the because of illegal operations in which, and you know, the trucks selling on the street, so that, but I pass by regularly a good number of the stores that are open and there's
Like
no
legal ones?
legal
Yeah.
ones, the legal ones I'm talking
Yeah,
about
yeah.
now. And all hours of the night, you know, there's a location on 23rd and 8th, for example. There aren't crowds outside. I think the crowds that we envisioned, I don't see them. But
They're not overrun with gangbangers and.
right, even so, some of the, yeah, so we'll just keep moving through methods of operation. I don't have anything.
Okay, well, actually,
But I-
before we do, Todd, do you have a comment on hours of operation?
Yes, can everybody hear me?
We still can't hear you.
Aye.
It's on
Okay,
his end. I tested everything with the audio.
Oh, okay, thank you.
His mic's not working.
my mic is working. Nobody can hear me? No?
Oh, it is showing that something's going on with it. Yeah, I see the little outline.
It's not his usual camera either.
Huh.
I
Oh, you know
wonder,
that?
He's on and off where I can know that it's usually.
yeah, Todd, maybe you can try connecting.
I'm gonna,
Connecting to the speakers, it just might be.
Oh, yeah, you can see his transcript comes up. It's,
Oh.
I'm going to.
Oh, yeah.
Zoom definitely hears him. We just don't hear him.
Todd, can you try speaking?
yes, can anybody hear me?
Oh, now we can hear
Yes.
you.
You can hear
Yes.
me
Oh,
here.
so maybe the owls
Oh,
are.
nice to be heard. So the hours of operation thing, I want to second what Catherine said, which is that with regards to the survey, a lot of the people just don't draw a distinction between the licensed places, which look like medical facilities, at least in my experience, and the illegal dispensaries, which are just awful, right, in terms of sound and crowds and whatever. I do think I've always had a problem with the one size fits all strict adherence to hours of operation and distance. I mean, take the example of an apartment building that has a well-behaved, even licensed dispensary in it. And if their experience tells them that 12 AM is a good thing, and they insist on staying open till 2 AM, which is the law, I think our responsibility, if we're doing due diligence, is to make note of that and file the report. But anyway, those are my comments.
Great, thanks, Todd. Anyone else have thoughts on the hours of operation?
It's gonna be tied to the method of operation a little bit. So I think one of the things is, I've noticed this is like sometimes they let the security go early. Where I think if you're gonna say like hours of operation, it's gonna be like in your crowd controlled security plans, you have to have coverage. You have to demonstrate coverage of security passed, right? Because the whole idea is we don't want people loitering. So like, you know, I would say one of the main concerns would be like, all right, 2 o'clock it closes, people go, they grab, and then because it's closed, that's when they sit outside, and that's where the complaints are gonna come.
Mm.
You know, it's like, so if you're gonna do that, I would say like, if you're gonna close at 2, you need to have coverage for security and crowd control for 2:30. Like, and you might say like, oh, there's no one there. It's like, well, you know, at the end of the day, that's like, you're gonna have to have coverage around a buffer to make sure there's not people in front smoking.
Mm.
And I think it's not unreasonable to say like at least a half an hour before and after you open and close, right? Like just like a bar, you couldn't, you know, a bar has to kind of show like at the end of the day when they close out, they're doing the same thing, right? If there's a bunch of drunk people on the street, they're gonna get pinged for the same thing.
I mean, I guess we could probably mimic something similar to bars, I guess, right? Like if we already have that figured out.
Wait. I'm sorry, is this retail or is this on site?
We do
Retail.
have the ability to make a distinction.
So retail liquor is only allowed until when? Midnight?
Midnight.
So why are we giving till 2 o'clock?
I mean, beer is allowed till 24/7.
Yeah.
I would say, like, to me,
So-
marijuana is more similar to beer than liquor.
So
There's definitely feedback from the community about.
one of the
actually
other
those things.
reasons why they're open late, a lot of them are doing delivery services. And so those things are happening as well.
I just have, I live off of Union Square, 2 blocks off Union Square.
Mhm.
There's a group called
The days.
Dazed.
Days, right?
And they're terrible neighbors. And there's
Mhm.
people outside, hanging out outside there. They actually have speakers outdoors, outside,
Oh,
playing
that's
music.
obnoxious.
They're really
Oh,
loud.
do
That's
they?
And they're loud. And I've gone in there numerous times and I said, guys, is this legal? I don't think this is legal what you guys are doing. And they blow me off completely.
Mm.
And like, I would love for them to come in front of the
Well,
board.
their license is
They
going up.
did come before us
They did?
in the early.
Yeah, I remember voting on
Right,
that.
so they came before us because they, right, and so it's helpful for us to be able to. You know, this is aside from what we're talking about now, but it's helpful for us to be able to, if you all know this, 3 or 4 of you know this. When I pass by, I don't see anything, so if that's happening.
They're bad
so that-
apples.
They don't have a permanent license. So.
No.
I would love to get rid of their license. The guys, the Union Square, what is it, the Union Square Travel Company, those guys seem like good neighbors, they seem like they've got security, they're disciplined. The guys Dazed on Union Square are not nice
They
people.
should have reached out to it. What I'm saying is their license ends next week. They had a 30-day to come back for us. So if we're not talking about days right now. They didn't hit the 30 days that the law said for comment. They have to come to the community board 30 days before the license. They have to send notice. Do we have a notice for Dazed?
Yes.
Okay.
Can we comment on that?
Yes.
Yes. It's technically, we shouldn't be voting on it in this meeting.
I would love to bring that up.
We have an extension, so they have, we have an extra.
30 days, so next meeting cycle.
Yeah.
Okay. Just, I was just pulling, it could, by the way, that would be, they can get a permit, they don't have to. If we were to pass them, they could get a permanent license. They do not have one.
I just think that like, they're not good neighbors. And every single time that I've tried to be polite and nice to them about what they're doing. They haven't been polite back and they've shown. No ability to kind of do things. And the fact that they're playing music outside
Let's see.
is totally illegal.
Yeah,
But
well,
they-
that's, the same has been true with a number of locations. They've had, spring, I don't know what you call it, spring days. Polanco Brothers, same thing, 42nd Street. They've all had.
Okay, well, I live next to this one. I'm sitting on the community board,
Yeah.
so I want to comment on this one.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
This is
it sounds like
right in my
you
back.
all-
Their hours, as indicated, it's midnight.
Okay, but
That's
like,
what they're smoking. Are they
So are you all
past
behind
midnight?
everyone
I don't know if
Yeah.
they're past midnight, but there's usually a group in the evenings when you walk through Union Square, there's usually a group of people that are outside smoking. There's a good sized group of people and there's music playing. And I don't know if it's 12 o'clock or if it's 1 o'clock.
That's
It's just in
Well,
the evening.
what I would say is if you notice it's past one, like, and this is where it goes into the control. Cause this is what I was gonna say, like, this is, cause I have like some of my block, I've never had a problem with the one, I live on 30th. So there's I can pull it up, but like. I think it's a medical or. No, it's a normal one. It's on 30th, never have a problem, right? It's clean. And I would, if I was on the media, if someone says, I'd say like, look, here's the things I noticed. There's never a problem. I walk my dog's lake. My dogs that's when they want to go to the bathroom. But at 2 o'clock when they're closed, it's closed. There's no problem. There's someone there making sure no one's there.
Terrific.
And that's
He's my
what,
neighbor.
Yeah,
Like-
okay, so for that application, it sounds like we're hearing it next, at our next
Next
cycle.
cycle.
So let's
Next cycle.
save that
Yeah.
discussion for
Yeah,
that.
okay. Well, I want to
That
comment on
said-
that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that said, going back to the hours, the way that it's written here. Are there any changes that we wanna make? It sounds like we might be okay with what is.
I still, and everybody on this committee may disagree with me. I still think that this is not the same as beer. And I still think that I think that we should be mimicking liquor and wine licensing. And look, I'm all for, I've mentioned this numerous times about keeping the city open later and later. I just think that being able to give people access to this high potency late at night, I don't know if it's similar to liquor to me, and that strikes me as being not great. Like, I think that retail establishments in the work that, when you look at California, retail establishments have closing times around midnight. It's not 2 a.m. in the morning. And maybe what it could be is, the retail establishments are done at 12 and like they're allowed to deliver until 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't really support a 2 a.m. deadline here.
Yeah, I mean, again, in looking at CB9's guidelines, they said 12 a.m. for retail.
And I think it's totally appropriate. If you want to go and you want to do have your thing, just go earlier and buy what you need to buy.
So I'm like briefly clicking around on the ones that are in our district. Most of them close at 10 or
11.
midnight, some are 11, some are 8. So I think if we wanted to change it to midnight, I'm fine with that.
And maybe just say like, you're allowed deliveries till 2 a.m.
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, I mean, is anyone, again,
I like it with only so that people don't run into the 70 hours.
so going back to what the state
Right.
requires.
So, and I'm okay with extending the delivery window to 2 a.m. Yeah,
I think that's a good compliment.
that's
At
fine.
that point, people probably want delivery more than to go out to go grab
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
That's not a hot take on that. I feel like
Right,
it's reasonable, yeah.
like if you're in Times Square, at 1 a.m., it's no, so this is where we get into every neighborhood's a little bit different.
Different.
So if you're in New York, if you're in Times Square, but I think they close even at midnight. But if you're in Times Square, so everything is open at 1 a.m.,
Fair.
2 a.m. So,
Not this week place in Times Square. It's open till 11:45.
right, what about Polanco Brothers? And they probably close the
Where's
same,
where's that one?
42nd,
42nd and.
between,
that
Yeah.
one
Yeah,
is
the one in Times Square closes before midnight.
11.
Yeah. I guess, and another question, as we revise these guidelines is sort of like, are these gonna be hard requirements? So for example,
Mhm.
if a retailer comes to us and says, no, I'm gonna stay open till 2 because that's what the state allows me to, do we then issue a deny because that no longer?
I think it matters on where it is, like,
Yeah.
there's one that stays up at 1 a.m. right outside the Port Authority, right? And like, it's all commercial, and I understand, but if you can say like, look, I'm at the Port Authority, like, one of the things I would say, like, I know this is counterintuitive, but you say like a hospital where they have like, hey, we have shifts, people coming off of shifts to hospitals at midnight. This is where we're in a commercial area, so let's say not our thing, but if you guys know like that, like movie theater area where you're not by a resident, so, cause we mentioned like, hey, by a resident, I would say like, if you want to do past 12 a.m. for delivery, you have to be in a commercial area or something, like you have to explain to us why it fits into the area.
so I go back to, I would leave it, I think what Samir's offered is helpful. in that most of these businesses are not operating past midnight. And so just, I would say leave it till 2 a.m. and let people decide for themselves, because it's not a sticking point unless you're in a residential building. So then maybe if we had maybe the midnight deadline would help, I'm thinking out loud. The
Yeah,
midnight deadline would help curtail in areas where we know people should be closed.
yeah, and I mean, like, to the point we were discussing earlier around, we generally try to pinpoint. Like, when we work with an applicant, right, we always say, like, look around you, what time are.
So we could
comparable
also
businesses
add that
closing?
language. These are the guidelines, but we ask you to be sensitive to what the local business climate operating hours
Yeah,
are.
yeah,
So
and
that you're not,
definitely- Yeah,
because I think you were saying, so that Milan, you were saying that, so that you're not creating unnecessary noise, foot traffic in the area, public, the potential for public loitering at that time of night.
yeah, I wanna go to the people online, Yoden, you haven't spoken yet.
Um, hi, I think you all already said what I was going to say. I've noticed that most of the retail operations close around or before midnight. I am in favor of making our closing time 12 instead of 2 a.m. I think I foresee some complications if we have a different closing time for deliveries, because practically the retail operation would have to stay open till 2, I guess, unless they do it remotely. Their deliveries, I don't know how you can have like 2 different closing times. But yeah, in general, I'm in favor of 12 a.m. like CB9 for closing time. And I think that is it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Yoden. Todd?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
So traditionally, the way we've dealt with these sort of things in other contexts is we know, or we're supposed to know, or we know our district better than anybody. If there are areas or regions like Times Square or specific places that are overwhelmingly residential, over time, as we gain more experience and we get more feedback from the people of our district, we can have or should review on an annual basis where we think the time guidelines should be changed. If we agree, for example, that there's a residential area where it's better to have it be 12 p.m. 12 a.m. as we're discussing, then we shouldn't hesitate to implement that with respect to that area. Or if we wanted to carve out something that says, if a proximity requirement where there's a huge residential building that's impacted based on numerous complaints, but it should always have a caveat associated with it. It should say something like, upon presentation of compelling evidence, the board has a discretion to deviate from the guideline. And then when we do our due diligence review, we go out and we have the guideline and we try to stick to it with respect to that site or area or block. And then if they present compelling evidence that in their case, it's not relevant, we have the discretion to do it. And again, I applaud the recognition by the committee that we don't have to always parallel the New York State regulations, because one of the acknowledged weaknesses of the law statewide is that it doesn't represent the granularity of New York City and its many neighborhoods.
Great, Todd. Yeah, I mean, on that point, just to maybe wrap up the hours of operation, conversation, I'm wondering, to your point, if it's very much like some of our other standards that we have, on our board, which is that maybe our standard is 12 a.m. and that's what, we strongly prefer. But of course, if you are located in an area where there are no residences, like if you're in Times Square, for example, maybe the 2 AM is fine. So, you know, having, maybe massaging this language a little bit so that it's not, again, like not a hard requirement that they close by midnight. But it's something that, you know, is going to be a standard for us going forward for retail operations, and we reserve the right to allow for later hours if the neighborhood, if it makes sense for that neighborhood. Is that something people would be on board with?
It feels common sense to me, like it feels reasonable.
Okay, great. And then in regard to on-site consumption,
Will we
Yeah.
keep saying delivery can be later?
what do people think?
I think Yodon had a good point that I could see that being problematic for a business that like has a retail shop but does delivery. So they have to close the retail shop but keep the delivery open. And I mean, I guess it can be managed, but I could see how that could be annoying or
I mean,
difficult.
I've seen both restaurants and I think cannabis stores that often have two entrances, one for delivery
Oh,
and one
okay.
for retail. So I think we should give them the option.
Cause I think for the delivery, they can like pre-check delivery people. So you have to check, if like you or I were gonna walk in, they have to check us each time we walk in, even if we're regulars,
Mhm.
license and for age.
So delivery works a little bit different, Janice,
Yeah.
just quickly, it works a little bit different for cannabis operation in that they hire their own in-house staff. And most of them are not using like motorized bikes, they're using car services and things like that, so it's a little bit different, but it's worth asking, so we know how they operate. Um,
And that would be like in the control section, which is the second section, which I was
right,
talking about,
that's
which I
right, so
think
move
we can
forward.
take time considerations in that security and control.
Mhm.
Okay, so it seems like we're fine with delivery going later if they want to. We don't know if it's gonna operationally make sense, but,
Yeah,
but we're not gonna
Okay,
like require them to close delivery at the same time. Okay. And then does, for on-site consumption, you know, this is very much tagged to our liquor license standards. Does this also make sense? Oh, sorry. let me just try to make that bigger.
What section?
No, so this is,
Oh, go. What was your question?
so right now it says no establishment for the on-site consumption of cannabis, which is located within 500 feet of a residence, shall have hours of operation later than 1 AM Sunday through Wednesday and 2 AM Thursday through Saturday. The way this is written, I would interpret this to be that if we in the future get an on-site applicant and they say, I'm gonna operate till 4 AM because that's what the state allows me to do we deny them based on these guidelines? Or do we adopt language that's
I think
again similar to?
my personal opinion is that like, we've shown that we are willing to revisit these guidelines when we need to. We have, and we are doing that now because we've had issue with retail. I would rather keep what we have for onsite. And then if there becomes an issue, once we actually get a single onsite applicant, then we can deal with it then.
Okay. Okay, so that means that, again, if an applicant comes, they say, I want 4 AM, we would
Goodbye.
deny.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so then moving on. To method of operation. Again, right now, it's not very specific, maybe it doesn't need to be very much more specific. So under this section, cannabis applicants shall provide noise and odor mitigation plans demonstrating how their establishments will minimize noise and odor pollution. Yeah. And then, let's see what else under here. We do consider crowd control security plans in the matrix, so I think the matrix really speaks to our, you know, the more holistic process, so not, axing an applicant just because they don't do something. Okay, the way this is presented, if they do not provide a noise and odor mitigation plan, is that going to be an issue? Are we considering these holistically? Or maybe that's a broader question for everything. Is there anything that could be an automatic deny if they don't meet something that's written in these guidelines?
Janice, can I sorry, I should have raised my hand.
No, go
I've
for it.
never
Sorry.
seen that matrix before. Is that something that is being presented now? This method of operation matrix.
It's
Have we
always
had this?
Yeah, unfortunately, if you access like the HTML version of this resolution, you don't get the formatting, so it doesn't look like a
Oh,
matrix. So maybe that's why you haven't seen it, even if you have seen the resolution. But this is, we use a matrix for everything, so. This
oh,
is the-
okay. Because I didn't use it in the application that I worked on. So, but
Oh, yeah,
okay.
this is for when the applicant comes to the committee, and we as a committee have to judge. Yeah, the
Oh,
merit of
okay.
the application, so,
Review,
yeah, so we haven't done that in a long time.
Right.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Yeah,
Can I
Yeah.
ask something? I guess this might be relevant to like method or manner.
Mhm.
And I don't know what the sentiment is on this, but I recall there being an applicant that came in and I remembered asking them a question about like the aesthetic or the vibe that they are going for.
Mhm.
And I didn't really have any particularly strong opinion. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't hearing Rick and Morty tie-dye and marijuana
Mhm.
leaves all over the place
Huh.
because no offense to anybody, but that just doesn't do it for me. I feel like we should demand a little bit more.
The bloodshot eyes with the.
Yeah, so I feel like I don't know if any of those types of considerations are part or could be part of something we consider because I personally just would not want to see that in the neighborhood. And for example, this applicant, I recall them saying it's gonna be like the Apple Store. I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, great.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, wonderful. And I'm not saying that is necessarily an objective, but I feel like something I definitely that grinds my gears is seeing that type of very like, I don't know, like, I'm not even sure what the right way to, it's the lowest common denominator of appeal to me, and I would love to make sure we discourage that.
Yeah, in the regulations, there are some rules regarding like what they can show and like how,
Okay.
like, for example, they can't like reference any like cartoon characters or something like that, so.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, I did not like include that in this presentation as to what the details are, but if that's something that.
Well, I guess if it's covered, if you think we have coverage in it, in our guidelines, then great. I just have to admit, I wasn't
Well,
sure.
what I mean is like, it's not in our guidelines, but it's sort of like if there are.
They're in the
Yeah.
Oh,
they're in
is
the
it?
OCM
Oh, okay.
guidelines. And so what happens is, so there's at least one other community board resolution where I think the store had like Flintstone weed gummies or something like that, and they actually wrote OCM to say we oppose this application because the marketing of the products
Interesting.
is to children if it has Flintstone,
Oh, yeah.
And so
absolutely.
those are the kinds of things you can get into when you're actually reviewing the application. I don't know. And that's what I was gonna say. I don't know when we'll keep going forward, but to try to align what we respond to in an application to the New York State guidelines. So if we're denying something, we want to go to the guidelines and say, this is what the guidelines say, and this is what, you got flowers coming out of the store onto the sidewalk, and you're not supposed to have signage on the sidewalk, or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's worth adding that into, I mean, even if it's a reference to abiding by the regulations, into the.
And you get to take a look at it live, like we were saying, the applicant does have the probationer, they have a soft opening, so you'll get to see,
Mhm.
and we'll be able to comment that way.
Yeah, I mean, is that something people we interested in adding to the guidelines at all? Just, to essentially emphasize what would be the regulations.
Around the aesthetics.
Yeah, the aesthetics, I mean, I imagine it manifesting itself as like the merchandising and like the
I think that's fine.
advertising.
They wanted to go, maybe not in the guidelines, but in the matrix,
Okay, that could be,
because then we go a little more.
Yeah.
I feel like it's just
Yeah.
hard to, I feel like it's gonna be end up being one of those like, you know, when you know it things, and like it's hard
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
break
It
down.
is subjective
Yeah.
for sure
Yeah.
too, yeah, I get that.
okay. Do other people like that idea, just adding it to the matrix?
And may I ask, how would you maybe phrase that, or how would you position it in the matrix? Like, what might we? refer to
Guys,
as-
can you repeat what you said about adding to the matrix? I can't quite hear it.
Samir, do you wanna?
Yeah, I think what we're proposing is under manner, method of operation. Adding another item, I don't know exactly how it would be phrased, but something around. The aesthetics of the establishment, where a less desirable feature would include. Things that are perhaps feel like they're appealing more to children and I don't know how would you guys?
I would say it's not necessarily just about Rick and Morty or Mickey Mouse,
Right.
but just like your
well, good.
tropes of tie-dye and big marijuana leaves and just ostentatious.
Just to jump, all of that is
In
covered
the-
in the legislation.
In the
You'll-
regular, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, okay, yes, that, I'm glad Josh said that. That's already in the rules and regulations.
Yeah,
Okay.
like it,
Alright, then
if
maybe we don't
you,
need to
if you
touch it.
see like I'm trying, I can't think of what, like if you walk up to whatever it is, like on Herald Square, all you're gonna see is like their logo and New York State license dispensary,
Mhm.
and that's it.
Right.
That's all you can do.
Okay.
You can't have Rick and Morty, you can't
Yeah,
have
okay.
pot leaves, any of that.
Okay, so it sounds like it's technically a non-issue then.
There's a marketing section in the regulation.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
Sure.
and
perfect.
and they can decorate the inside of the store a little differently, but
I get, yeah,
usually there's like a foyer before you get into the
Yeah.
actual store.
okay.
Um,
So maybe no action required perhaps, maybe it's already addressed
yeah,
sufficiently.
yeah, so
Okay.
for example, like you can't use certain terminology,
Yeah, it'd be shorter to list what you can do than what you can't do.
Yeah, you can't show weeds, you can't,
Mhm.
that's why they mostly have that foyer, like the
Yeah.
entry foyer just for ID check.
Okay,
Behind the wall, they can do
yeah.
not
at that
whatever,
point-
but they.
Yeah, and I feel like
whatever.
at that point, it's fine, whatever, you know.
No, but if they have people like outside with weed sides trying to do like calls, that's not allowed. So if that's something that's noted, like if you're walking by and you know it's someone that's like, oh, come in, like, you know, like.
Oh, people on the.
You can't bark.
Gotcha.
Like the loud I mean, the music also, you're not supposed to hear
Yeah,
music coming out.
yeah, which is already clearly here in the matrix and in the guidelines, certainly.
yeah. Yeah, there might be some things that are just covered, like for example, outdoor space, I don't think that's allowed. I don't think so I don't think it needs to be in our guidelines, but we can keep it there, you know, because it doesn't, again, the fact that it doesn't contradict law, it is fine.
Where do we?
I
control-
learned, by the way, Janice, that you are allowed to have a bench in front of your cannabis store as long as it's directly in front of your wall.
Right, but people can't smoke there, right?
No.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so it sounds like, no change to method of operation then?
Sounds like we're good, yeah.
Okay, cool. Community engagement, we request a questionnaire, and then ask the applicant to sign an affidavit at the end of it. I don't know if anything here needs to change.
Is the questionnaire? Wait, when you say questionnaire, is that a CB5 questionnaire? Or
Yeah,
that
we
we
create
have
a
our, okay,
questionnaire.
okay.
So essentially, like, for example, if they don't fill out the questionnaire, that would be denial from us.
Got it.
Because we're saying, hey, in our guidelines,
We
we're
don't
requiring
know
it.
either, right?
Yeah. So if we're okay with that, we'll keep it like that. Yeah, that we require that they engage with local co-op and conduct, like, you know, community organizations. They come to our committee to present. And then they'll sign an affidavit at the end. So all of that, if an applicant doesn't do, it would lead to denial. Is everyone okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so now onto the maybe more complicated issues around plays. So that question of what to do when presented with the public convenience and advantage waiver. Does anyone want to kick off discussion around whether we should comment on it? If we do want to comment on it, how we want to set up guidelines for doing so? Yeah.
So I think, you know, at the end of the day, we can comment, but I think the more like. The way I would look at it, unlike something where, you know, like they've been granted this waiver is if there's like a strong, like. I would say the normal is noted, right? Where if it's something where it's like, wait a minute, like. You're building this out of a room in a school. Wait a minute, like when there's like egregious, I think that's something where we like, hey, we're uncomfortable with this waiver because you know, either there's some very valid complaint that's coming in. For instance, the school thing where like somehow you guys are letting it be built right next to a school, right? It's like I would imagine other types of noted and. But like, I would also say if someone comes in and is like, this is, we have this waiver, this is why we think it's good. If they have like. The reason why they kind of, I would say like, you know, we noted and appreciated the kind of run through. And that way we could say like, hey, when you come to present to us, if you got a waiver, we'd really appreciate just to explain what the waiver is and how you see it. Because. If someone's gonna come in and put the effort, like, I think you should turn around and say like, hey, they did a really good job explaining why they have their waiver and we. There's noted and there's also like, we approve of the waiver, like, well, you know, I think it should be noted for most of the time, but like, say approve or like egregious, like, wait, what? Like, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I mean, so the waiver is only an option if it's gonna be between 500 to 1,000 feet. So it would still meet the distance requirements as set forth by the state. You know, for example, 500 feet from a school, like it could not be next to a school. I guess where we could come in as communities and say like, hey, like you missed this. school,
Yes,
right?
that's where,
fair.
Yeah,
or would say it's like, it's just 501, but it's right next to this subway stop for a school, right? Like
Where
the,
all the kids are gonna be walking.
yeah, like it's like right across the street, like. From like the cutting room where that's the station for kids, they're leaving a
Yes.
Success Academy.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, you guys missed something, this is. Literally, kids are walking by this.
yeah.
So I do see the waiver. So are we talking about situations in which the applicant comes to us and said, we would like your opinion on us having a waiver? Is that what we're
It's
saying?
basically, they probably want,
Right,
I mean, I guess they probably want like a letter of support for
some sort
waiver.
of letter of support, right? And so, this is an opportunity for due diligence for for us to, I can't imagine, so it's complicated the way it is now because OCM grants a cannabis applicant license with the understanding that they will not allow another business to open within 1,000 feet of that particular location. So they already covenanted with one business. And so you're asking us to get in the middle of the covenant that the state made with the business to allow another business to come in. I'm not so sure about all this, and there have, you know, earlier this year, so you all read up, but my opinion is that this is an opportunity to really have the applicant make a compelling case to us why they should have a waiver and we should say yes to a waiver. So it involves things like engagement with the community, and analysis that proves that their business doesn't, it's just a market economy, you know, it's just a market economy. It's not one business outdoing. The way these businesses are set up, there's not but you know, it's like McDonald's being next door to Burger King, in my opinion, right? But it is an opportunity if the because if the applicant wants us to weigh in on a waiver, it is an opportunity for us to provide, to get a little more, into how this business operates.
Yeah, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's kind of like, it's a chance for us to.
And there has to
Accelerate the
be,
process.
the other part of it would say is there has to be a public discussion. That we would never, we would never go through this process without public notice.
Yeah, so essentially we are doing the due diligence process just
Right.
within this accelerated
Right.
timeframe,
Mhm.
right?
I want to just add on to Tyler. We also temporarily get multiple bites of the apple, right? They come in, the temporary license, and the state on the temporary can, like with the one in Union Square, state said, the board before wrote a letter saying, hey, we were very worried, this is too close to Union Square. And they said, well, this hasn't been designated as a city, as a child spot, so that does, your concern while noted, we're gonna approve the license. Then, so they can be approved the waiver, even if like, maybe we turn around and there is no problem, we just say, all right, you're gonna go for the waiver. And then 2 years later, if they wanna go for the permanent or they wanna keep getting their temporary, they have to come back before us. And if it's like, oh wait, this is a problem, we can then turn around and say like, look, this waiver was, you came and presented X, Y, Z as the reasons for your waiver, right? And we're noticing, hey, you present these reasons for a waiver and we accepted it and great, this has worked out well, like, and we want to note that this worked out well and this is why we're proving it. Or it could be B, where it's like, hey, you said you were gonna do this and now you got people outside smoking in front of us, you're getting this problem, X, Y, Z. So there's kind of a chance like after the waiver is approved to still go back when they're going for that permanent license and saying like, no, this isn't working out because of X, Y, Z reasons.
Yeah, so that exists, regardless. So, okay, so it sounds like if we are open then to,
Oh, Todd, I think is waving.
okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it sounds like so far we are open to, bringing in applicants and granting a waiver, provided they essentially just go through the process with us at this accelerated schedule. Todd?
Hey, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So looking at this situation, as I said earlier, I've been skeptical of the distance requirements and the whole regulatory schema, but this is the regulatory schema. A waiver is a loophole. If you look at the big picture of what's happening and the lack of success and the criticism of the Cannabis Control Board and the authorities that are managing this, they are going to be very likely to use this waiver to cram and get as many licensees into our district as possible. I'd be very suspicious of it. That being said, I would hope that, and what we've tried to do up until this point is take a holistic view as much as possible. We do have our distance requirements, which I've recommended that we try to get away from. But what I would recommend is we set a standard. There are different standards. They're just a low standard, a medium standard, and a high standard. The way lawyers deal with these kind of situations is they pick a standard such as clear and convincing evidence. In other words, if we're asked to pass judgment and advisory comment on the granting of a waiver, if we do it because we look at the situation and think we should support it or not support it, we should have a standard that we're only going to agree with it if there's clear and convincing evidence that it's warranted. And I frankly would be very, suspicious and based on what we've seen so far from the authorities to trust them with this new exemption. So as to our own use, I would say let's make a change that where the issue of granting a waiver comes up in our due diligence, we will be open to it only upon evidence of clear and convincing evidence, whatever we want to call our very high standard, that we're going to grant it. because then we're holding the authorities to a high standard, right? I mean, what is their standard, right? Granting a waiver, right? They better be able to, by the facts, show that it's a high standard.
Great, yeah, I mean, to that point, if we are gonna be open to hearing, to granting the waiver, yeah, the next question is what are going to be our standards for doing that? These are the factors that the Cannabis Control Board is going to consider, so number one, economic justification that highlights high consumer demand for additional retail dispensaries in the area. Number two, the number of illicit cannabis dispensaries or former illicit dispensaries in close proximity to both the existing and proposed locations. I'm not sure how they're thinking about that, but number three, existing social and economic equity licensees within the applicable radius of the location, and then any other factors. So, thinking about these points as a framework for the, what standards we want to set for whether or not we grant the waiver, in addition to, anything else we can think of. Does anyone have thoughts? Yeah.
Do we have any specific standards for the 500-foot rule for liquor?
Well, so for liquor, even though that rule exists, it never actually applies. Like, I don't think, like, just by existing, it provides an economic benefit to the community in the SLA's perspective. So, and people suspect that the Cannabis Control Board is like doing the same thing here, where it's basically giving them like.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, then I just like don't think we need to think about that hard. Like, if it's gonna not matter, then I think we should just say we're okay with 500 feet and call it a day.
But are we okay with 500?
I mean, I'm okay with 500 feet. I don't know how other people feel about 500 feet.
I mean, I don't, unless there's somehow problems between the two things, like. It's New York, it's Midtown, you can kind of absorb it.
Yeah, again, 500 feet would be a 2-block radius around.
2 block or 1 avenue.
Yeah.
I do think that, I don't really have a problem with it, but I do think that since the illegal shops have closed, I think that the density of shops together, at least walking around the district, to me feels less crazy, and I've heard personally just less people complaining about it. And so I wonder if the density and proximity of the illegal shops to each other now being eliminated actually isn't as much of a thing. I mean, Starbucks seems to be
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind.
sometimes very close together, and you're kind of like, really? But, it,
The market demands it.
yeah.
Yeah. Where is that slide? Oh, yeah. Well, I think it's just sort of like, so the number of Starbucks right now, that's representing the max number under the 1,000-foot, like, so for example, under the, like with 1,000-foot radius, it would allow for like a max of 50. And I wonder if maybe we kind of set a cap of some sort. So it's like, hey, the 1,000-foot radius was meant to maintain a certain number of businesses within our district. But in terms of where they're located, because the licensee doesn't have like, all the options as to where they can put their dispensary, so that you might end up with one closer to another. Is that something we'd be open to? So again, like using that example in the post, that was like, here's a retail dispensary that was 950 feet from another, like, is that really an issue?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at the map. I mean, I guess my thought is that. If you look at the image on the left on like 49th Street, like there are definitely 2 Starbuckses that would be too close. Under the 500-foot rule, because like they would be on the same avenue. I think that's too close. And so my personal opinion is that. We should let it be 500 feet, so in areas where it makes more sense to have them be more dense in terms of there being market demand, they can do that. And then similar to Starbucks on the right, there's a lot less Starbucks the further you go downtown. If that, if the market doesn't demand so many cannabis locations in a certain area, then they just won't be there. I think 500 is a reasonable number.
And you know, and I think another reason for the distance is, they're cash only businesses and the worry is some sort of some sort of crime would go and you would just go boom, boom down a block. And you'd be able to, like, and it would be. I know that was like Massachusetts, that was a large part of why the distance is there, because they were like. You know, like, what do you do if they have to have security and all that, but on the same token, there's the possibility of kind of tumbling through.
Libby?
Is that true? I thought you could pay with a credit card at any of these shops.
No.
All cash.
Well, I don't know about any, but.
No, you can't pay credit cards, just debt and credit, debit cards and cash.
And debit
Yeah.
cards,
I
they.
was gonna say, how do you do
Oh,
online delivery
okay.
with cash?
They do.
Yeah.
You can do
Yes,
it.
the
cash.
delivery.
You can
Why,
deliver
why
it.
not a credit?
It's really stupid.
Because credit
it's
cards
federal.
centralized,
Federal.
credit cards
They don't have
centralize the
Oh,
charge to the bank.
Okay.
So you don't necessarily make, so a
And
debit
because
card
it's
goes to a
illegal
local
federally.
bank.
I see.
Yeah, any part of the business that crosses the state line that brings in federal, which is
Yeah, yeah, it's a
illegal.
federal thing. Okay.
So the way
Yeah.
that the debit card works too is
The
that,
more
let's
you
say,
know.
let's say you go to a store, they will actually have a machine. That acts as an ATM,
Like an ATM.
and then they will give you the change back in cash. So they'll round to the nearest $5 and then give you the change. That's what I've
Oh,
seen.
with
Okay.
the credit card,
The debit card,
debit
Yeah.
card. Oh,
Mhm.
because they also don't take debit cards,
they take debit cards.
but with
But there's
this
a huge
this-
amount of cash
with
that
this
moves
right,
through.
cash back
It's the
situation.
same as, it's the same as the lottery, right?
So they-
There's also ownership issues as well. Cause technically, if you buy something with a credit card, there's a period where the credit card company owns it. The credit card companies don't want to assume that liability. That's why you can't buy a lottery ticket with a credit card.
Oh, interesting.
I
Okay,
guess I never
anyway.
tried to buy lottery tickets.
Okay, well, so based on what I heard so far, we're okay with a cannabis business being like under 1,000 feet of another cannabis licensee.
Mhm.
And we are thus open to considering a waiver request, but in considering that waiver request, we are essentially going through the due diligence process at an accelerated phase.
Yes.
Are there any additional considerations that we would want beyond what would be covered in the normal due diligence process? We're deciding whether or not to allow the license, like to grant the waiver, to support the waiver, I should say.
I don't feel like there needs to be.
Okay.
Yeah, same.
Any reason to not grant the waiver? Like even if they meet all the other requirements or guidelines? Yeah.
I feel like if they meet the other guidelines, because we have all of these parks restrictions, we're super dense with pops, like we're restrictive in all these other ways that,
Well,
Yeah.
I mean, question of if those still count.
I mean. Hopefully they will be more open going forward with a better reporting system coming out of the Parks Committee, but they're meeting the other guidelines as far as like proximity.
Okay, so we're fine with that then. Okay, so we're open to it
Mhm.
and we will support it if they meet. If they're like, we think they're fine otherwise. Okay,
Seems
great.
reasonable.
Okay, moving on to the protected.
So does that actually, in terms of demand, that actually opens up twice as many locations? 53, but now we have 5, but potentially opens up a lot more,
Yeah, like 4 times.
yeah, 4 times here.
But to, some people's points, it's let the market decide maybe. Okay, so this is a really key piece of it because again, we've rejected a lot of applications just based on the facilities listed under guidelines, which is not okay. As well as the distances, which are not at all enforceable. So let's look at these. And let's try to wrap this up maybe in the next half hour. Okay, so this is what is listed in the guidelines currently. So it states any application for a cannabis license within CB5 may only be approvable provided that the proposed location is no less than all these things. So I think number one, do we already agree to remove any sort of language that makes this like a eliminating factor? When it comes to the things that don't align with the state regulations.
Yeah, if it's not against the state like organizations, they're just gonna ignore us. They've done.
Well, I guess it's like,
I don't think-
we still want to keep in mind,
Can read the letter.
like, we still want to be mindful of what the community is concerned about. And so like, for example, the harm reduction facilities. Even if it's not enforceable, we should still be mentioning it, but it shouldn't be an eliminating factor because
Correct.
the state is not gonna respect it. So there's a question of, yeah, so it seems like we're on the same page about softening the language a little bit, right, around any sort of facilities that we want to mention that are not covered by state law.
Yeah.
Okay, great. That said, okay,
May I
so,
ask a question? Just for my own understanding,
Mhm.
because when I was kind of poking around on this, it was a little hard for me to. I felt like I couldn't fully grasp accurately what would be a community facility, what would be a harm
Yeah.
reduction facility. Like, I
Yeah.
conceptually understand this, but like, if you ask me to start putting together a list or like search, I'm like, I don't know, this could be, this might be, and so I don't know if. Maybe there's like a list of this stuff and it's really clear somewhere and that's
Yeah.
great. But maybe just for my own knowledge, I would love to make sure I understand what you mean
Yeah.
by that.
okay, yeah, sorry, I sped through this because it's like outdated legislation, but originally when they released the regulations, they said like. They put a distance requirement to community facility, and that includes, but may be, but not be limited to, a facility that provides daycare to children, a public park, a playground, public swimming pool, a library, or a center or facility with a primary purpose of which is to provide recreational opportunities or services to children or adolescents. So that's why our regulations, sorry, keep mixing up words, our guidelines say, community facility, and then it also calls out parks and public spaces and playgrounds.
Mhm.
But when they revise the definition, now it has to be like government owned, accessible to the public, and like serve children. So only this is covered by the state, and even then, you know, the city needs to pass a local law, so it's something that we would need to
Okay.
advocate for. But again, back to our guidelines.
Yeah.
Do we want to sort of keep these considerations around these facilities that are not covered by the state? Any thoughts? Okay, so maybe it's just about rewording this again so that these are our preferences for a location. So for example, like we get an applicant who comes in, they happen to hit all these distance requirements and we're like, yes, support. Or I guess deny unless they, you know.
That's fine. And as I said before, like, we don't have to fix everything right now. Like, if we change it and it still doesn't work, we can revisit it.
Okay, I guess we should change community facility to public use facility. And then back to this list, is there
So-
anything beyond playgrounds that you think might be worth us advocating for?
So there is rule, right? Like there's municipal, there's 9 MYCRR. Which says, but it's weird, right? It's not just 200 feet, it's 200 feet in the same street, right? So it's a minimum straight line measurement of 200 feet between any cannabis dispensary and a building exclusively used for house of worship. So like a mix, like the
Yeah, so I did explain before, right, that it seems like the way that they're interpreting the law, they are not strictly considering it exclusive use. So if you look at the local map, right, like those houses of worship are not in, a lot of them are not their own building.
correct. I'm just reading the law.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it's the law that says it's 200 feet of a building exclusively for used as a house of worship. So it means it has to be like a church, a self-standing church.
Well, that's what I mean, again,
Yeah.
if you look like the local map, the like notes. Places of worship that if you look up are not in, like not in their own building.
Mhm.
So it seems like even though the law states that, they're interpreting it more loosely, like in a more inclusive.
If they're like
manner.
if they're registered.
Basically, if they're registered.
Yeah, they would qualify.
Yeah.
Got it.
Mhm.
But
That-
I mean, when they denied the last time for us, they pointed this out when they wrote the letter to the board.
Mhm.
When we said like, hey, this isn't, this is, so, and I'm looking at the letter for Florida, so as an
Yeah,
example.
so this one would be, because it's not on the same road, I think.
Correct, it
Right,
has to be 200 feet on the same road. So they're saying, look, this is, they drew out. Basically, they told us this is what we're gonna consider for you,
Mhm.
for understand, so I would just, that's why I would say let's mimic. They wrote us a letter, it was a correspondence, right?
Mhm.
So right now, I wouldn't get rid of it, I would just go with what they said. Hey, this is what we're looking at from a community board and where you can comment,
Mhm.
right? So it said 200 feet from any cannabis dispensary in a building exclusively used as a house of worship. 500 feet from a public youth facility or a building exclusively used as a school.
Mhm.
And it's the same the same new definition that you put there for public youth facility. And then. But they can opt out. Like
What do you mean, opt out?
proposed cannabis use location to not be located in a municipality that opted out of allowing retail dispense. Oh, I never mind, excuse me, I missed
Yeah, I
that.
think it's just like,
So it's 200 square feet on the same street for churches.
Yeah.
It has to be a self-standing church. And, or 500 feet. But so the road, the church, the faith church, whatever, what are we calling it? We'll just say church for now, and just, that has to be on the same street, but the school does not.
no, it's the measurement that the state, and this is the same for liquor also, which is why I think it's actually would be difficult to argue this. Is that it needs to be on the same road, taken in a straight line measurement, essentially from like the center of one entrance to the center of another, like the other entrance,
Okay,
yeah.
oh yeah, same street, 500 square
Yeah,
foot,
yeah.
yeah.
So that's why I got, that's why they're not respecting our,
So shouldn't we just use what they kind of. Snap back at us when we've brought this up before?
what do you say?
Shouldn't we, I want to get rid of the house of worship, if the state board. Responding back to us when we originally said concerns about the distance from Union Square. So when this committee originally made concerns about, just reading, I have a bunch of letters where responses to the board, right?
Yeah.
So it was, actually, it was the one he was complaining about, the one on Union Square. So the reference was like, look, it's a public park that the children can be using. That was the concern that was written
Mhm.
for the license, and
Yeah.
they said, hey. We understand where you're coming from, but we follow pursuant to the New
Yeah,
York
it's
City
like-
regulation.
Here are the facilities, straight line measurement. That's
Correct.
what- That's the reason why they didn't respect our opinion, because we were like, you should include parks and it doesn't need to go in a straight line.
Yeah, so why don't we just use what we know that they're gonna do in terms of approval, right? Like, they've
Oh,
spelled
yeah,
out.
yeah. Well, no, that's what I'm like, so there, we'd wanna, again, align with the law, but then, you know, in considering whether, how much we're gonna support something or not, we can still take our community needs into account. So if our community really felt like, no, we really shouldn't have this near parks, then that's something that we should include in our opinion, even if it's not a deciding factor.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Libby.
I think that the plazas, especially as we've been advocating for more seating in the plazas in general, and expanding the plaza program. I think that people use that as an extension of the park. The ones listed are really just the same park. And I think that that's where people are like
Mhm.
sitting. And I do think that that's sort of an attractive. Like the point of the distance is so that then people don't immediately walk out
Yeah.
and smoke. And I think that
Mhm.
that's still happening a lot. As opposed to, I don't see that as much with like buying a bottle of wine and walking around with an open container.
Yeah, so you're saying that's something like maybe,
To loop back in.
yeah. But do you feel like there's an argument to be made as a public use facility, or is it just like something we would advocate for, in general?
I think. I think it's more like everybody is using it. I don't know that it's like a youth facility. But like there is programming inside of them, especially with there's no programming inside of the pops, to my knowledge, but pedestrian plazas, like as an extension of the bids, like Flatiron Nomad does do programming. They do like art stuff. It's a little bit geared towards adults, some of the time, but so then that criteria, I do think that we should just like still advocate for it. So I think it's on the line,
In Bryant Park, I would say is clearly like,
but that's a park that's.
yeah,
listed
it's not a
as-
pops.
that's not-
I-
well, It's a pedestrian plaza
I think a
specifically.
better example is like Madison Square Park also oversees the pop spaces
Mm.
around its immediate.
Yeah, the plazas that are like right next to it.
Mhm.
That like are still within that sort of initial footprint
Sure.
is technically a triangle with a bunch of seating
Mhm.
And
where
it's
you might
park-
sit with your stroller and it's
park
accessible.
space, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not
It's not
technically park space, it's DOT, but also not, so.
Okay,
The parks don't maintain it. It doesn't come out, the maintaining of it doesn't.
It's
come out of
maintained by like Madison Square Park, but the park does have,
Yeah, Nomad Fit, like the partnership does it.
MSP is.
The partnership does it, but they do it through I'm pretty sure DOT gives them permission to do for the square,
Sure.
the non-petition.
Yeah, I think it's the pedestrian plaza program.
okay, so on that note, that's certainly something if we feel like we should advocate for, we can advocate for, but not the pops. Anything else that,
Well,
like, back to the idea of public use facilities, anything else on this list that you think could count that we should mention?
well, we could, so. If it's if. In the pop area, we could ask for comment from whoever's running the pop. We're allowed to ask, like, we were allowed to go to. We were allowed to go to the parks or something like that and say like, hey, we're allowed to take their. As we're. Giving guidance, we're allowed to ask them for comment.
Yeah, of course,
Right.
but it's not like, this isn't gonna be a guideline that if you're, because right now, or in the past, we were considering pops as parks, and as a result, it kind of made everything
Oh,
within
yeah.
500 feet of a park. So.
It's complete, I understand.
Yeah, yeah.
I
No, but we would definitely, of course, if, anyone in the community, we would take their,
I just think the
Yeah.
plazas are a little bit more like structured.
Yeah.
Certainly like the ones in our district are structured more as like actual park space because they're connected to it
Yeah.
in this extension
Yeah.
and we're advocating for more of it.
That point, we could ask the conversion, and the conversion comes into like, this is the problem. That it makes it harder for the state to say like, no, go away, like they did with the Union Square argument, because we didn't go to the conversion, we just said, hey, it's close to the park. And that's when they waved their hand, go away. I feel like I'm just using that as an example of where this came up, and that's why I'm saying like, see how they responded, and then if there's still a concern, how do we address getting past their concern? Right, it just function, as Todd said.
It's just getting late, so.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
Thank you.
have next steps.
Okay, yeah, I think of this list, I think the only thing is maybe the childcare, which I think should be covered under as a school, and not a public use facility, but. Do other people feel,
Seems reasonable.
right, okay. Agree, okay, great. Okay, so. Back to. Okay, so I think we're good here. Soften language, change. Community facility to public use facility and make it so that. We would, I mean, like, following the New York State regulations around denying a applicant only if they don't meet the 500 foot from the school and 200 feet from. A house of worship and. measuring that according to the straight line method, not walking distance. Okay, great.
And then we're dropping it from 1,000 feet to 500 feet.
Oh, actually, yeah, and we would get
Or just
rid of
remove it.
this.
Got it, because it's already covered.
Actually,
Oh, you would keep
500 feet.
1,000, then you say, or 500 feet with the waiver.
Got
They
it.
need the PSA.
yeah, it would be, we would only
Yes,
reject it
yeah.
if they're 500,
Yes.
under 500 feet.
Got it.
Yeah, everything else would, yeah, be considered within the refer. With the measurement for everything else, do we wanna keep the walking distance idea?
It would be confusing if we're doing both.
Okay. Right, because New York State, we're saying, you know, we're aligning with New York State regulations around schools and houses of workshop, measuring them on the same straight line.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we will do the same for everything else. It needs to be on the same road.
Yeah, I guess so.
Well, I mean, we can feel differently.
Yeah, it's, I just wanna make sure, when we say the same road, does that have to be on the same block, or like, what do they mean by same
No,
road?
same road. So like,
So it's like Third Avenue, it could be.
Yeah, like
anywhere
an
on
Eighth
Third
Avenue. Yeah, but I mean, 500 feet,
Right,
right? So-
okay, yeah, I think that's fine, I think doing it that way. is fine.
Okay, like the issue, right, the issue is really just if it's around the block, or I remember there was like it was like behind a school.
Right.
Because it's not on the
Yeah,
same
I
block.
think it's to do straight line on the same road.
Okay. Okay, great, so then, if nothing else on that, topic. Then I think it's just moving through. Yeah, so we covered distance. Covered, was it island border mitigation, hours of operation. Restricted licensing areas. I'm not sure if these are in reference to, well, like hours, or if these are meant to reference new RLAs, like that are specific to cannabis. I don't know if Catherine or possibly Todd, if you know the origins of this.
This was more just aligning with what we already had
For liquor.
for liquor, exactly.
Yeah.
Sorry, is this like already, like, cause I'm not super fluent with RLAs, but is that? Is that its own thing for cannabis? Like there is a cannabis RLA?
Yeah, that's what
No,
I'm
we-
asking.
Is that
No, it's
what it
not
is?
specific. We were
Or is
using the
it-
same, we were relying on what's already established.
Mhm.
With the
Okay.
idea that the vision for cannabis might, I don't know, in 20 years look like.
Well, for example, I mean, it also includes future restricted licensing
Right.
areas, so like
Uh-huh,
someone, you know, talked about that concentration of harm reduction facilities. And it,
Okay.
you know, there was a question of like, should that be a restricted licensing area where we say like,
okay,
You
but
know.
that. And I'm sorry if I'm being
Yeah.
really silly.
No,
about
no,
it.
no.
Maybe it's a getting late. Okay, so the RLA would apply to cannabis, but it would also apply to liquor. Or am I absolutely?
no,
getting that wrong?
I'm asking the same question.
You're asking the
for-
same thing, so we're all asking the
For
same.
example,
Guys, so
Our restriction, wait, hold on, Todd, right, there are hour restrictions for the liquor RLA, so do those same hours then apply, you know, for
Okay,
cannabis?
okay, I think I get that.
Yeah.
Alright.
Yeah, Todd, sorry.
I just wanted to say that the origin of the RLA was based on research that certain portions of our district had such a high concentration of bars and restaurants and other such establishments that it warranted earlier hours of operation, in most cases with an exemption. So we talked about that earlier. We have to decide whether we want to consider cannabis guidelines for our own purposes, for our own purposes, similar to those for alcohol, and the operation of bars that serve it in the same way. You know, I would argue that we should probably keep it similar with an opt-out if it's not really relevant for that block. But that's something for the committee to decide.
Okay, thanks, Todd. So do we just wanna leave it?
I'm fine.
Outdoor space, we're gonna leave, even though it's covered by state law. And then communication process, we were fine with everything here, and the matrix we're fine with.
Yeah, what were the sub bullets?
For-
Yeah, I think this is just to confirm that, like, isn't the RLA
Yeah,
restrictions.
or this isn't specific to the Heartline. No, this is our communication.
But only for stuff in the RLA?
No. Like-
Oh, I see. Okay, I thought this whole page was only. the
Oh, no,
RLA stuff.
No, I think. it's just-
Oh, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy with this.
Okay, awesome. Okay, great. Then to summarize, I think we hit every point. For hours, we're gonna change the language so that we set its new standard for retail at midnight. With the ability to extend those, for us to grant later hours, depending on the neighborhood. Delivery is still fine at 2 AM. For method of operation, no changes to what we're requesting. In regard to the PCA waiver, that will be a new section that we add, saying that we are going to be open to these requests. And essentially, it means that the applicant will just go through this whole process, adding delivery to pace. And then regard to distances, we will be taking a holistic approach in considering distances. So as long as they meet the state regulations, according to their measurement method and everything, that would not, by meeting those regulations, that would not lead to a denial. And then everything else where we have additional facilities that we're concerned about, we are going to maintain these distances, and facility types, and just, note that we are measuring it in the same method, and that it will factor into our, consideration as to like how strongly we are supporting someone. And then, for things outside of the guidelines, we will advocate for playgrounds to be included as, a public youth facility. And then separately, we will also, advocate for protections around parks and public spaces. And we will also check in on, the inclusion of preschools as, schools. Great. Any last comments? We can wrap up.
Nope.
Okay, well, awesome work. Thank you everyone for showing up. We did not meet quorum tonight, so, especially like special thanks to all of you for being here and going through all this hard work, and it's really gonna make a difference for.
An absolutely incredible work.
Oh,
that you all
actually,
have
hold on.
done.
Have we?
Wait,
Huh?
Three,
we don't need to vote. right?
6, 7.
People online don't come to us.
Todd's out,
That's-
Todd.
But we have 8, that would
Eight.
be 9.
B9.
Wait, I need to,
Wait, I count for quorum. Are we still short?
yeah. Let's make a motion. Now, or do it-
No. we'll just take a look at that.
7.
I think we can do like,
10, 11.
And raise I think we can do recommendations. to the
Yeah.
Committee,
Right now.
yeah, so we could say like,
Okay.
when we go to exec, we say, we didn't have an official vote, it's not an official vote. We had a
But we
recommendation,
were unanimous.
and the recommendation
Okay.
was. 8 in favor.
Okay, so do we?
Did we
recommend
vote in the
this?
bylaws, Janice, on the show of hands thing? That,
Does this count? as a-
Sure.
I think this is a thing.
Okay, so do we all recommend what I just?
I,
did?
Yes.
Okay, David, are you, okay,
Great.
Yode,
We figure out the one hand that.
Todd, okay, and I think
Okay.
It's every,
that's it, right? Yeah. Awesome,
every time you raised your hand.
I'm recording anyway, so
Okay, great.
okay, great,
I recorded myself as a yes. I got it up and I started trying to.
okay, so unanimous,
phenomenal.
yeah,
All right.
then we are done for tonight, this meeting is adjourned, thank you, everyone.
Do we have any, talking points to go through?
For this,
It wasn't on the agenda.
for tonight?
I thought each committee was gonna go